Now, I'd love to introduce our next conversation. We've got an amazing panel talking about challenge, adversity, and triumph, supporting women, trans, and non-binary individuals within the workplace. Our panel features Tara, who is a transformational executive coach. She is also the CEO and inclusive marketing and brand strategist for her consulting firm, Mars Hill Consulting, co-founder and lead designer for e-commerce, gender inclusive fashion startup, Umoja Threads apparel company, and the founder and CEO of Heads Up at Work, a technology startup whose mission is to democratize DEI and revolutionize the standards by which we hold corporate America accountable. Welcome, Tara. Christine is the founder and managing partner, excuse me, Christine, who I've had the honor of interviewing before on our Chat and Learn program, is the founder and managing partner at Conscious Thrive, a consulting firm with a mission to bring the human back to the center of corporate businesses. Christine has designed and facilitated workshops both within the US and internationally. Her coaching practice is centered in helping underrepresented leaders and executives reach their next level of success through healing and authenticity so they can create impact on their own terms. She's also a queer, non-binary immigrant of Filipino heritage and believes that in order to create a thriving, loving, and inclusive world, we must start the work within. Yes, and welcome, Christine. It's a pleasure to see you here again. Jen is the Chief Revenue Officer at SAP and has spent more than 20 years building and leading high-performing sales and technical teams. Jen has held senior executive roles at leading cloud companies, including Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, and Cisco. Most recently at AWS, she oversaw a global sales and architect team focused on cloud migration sales. At Salesforce, she focused on delivering connected experiences for customers through commerce, service, marketing, sales, and CPQ cloud technologies. Welcome, Jen. Dr. Shane has been featured as America's go-to leading LGBTQ+ expert in the New York Times, ABC News, Yahoo, and CNN. She's the cast member of TLC's I Am Jazz. Her writing has appeared in the Journal of Nonprofit Education and Leadership, the Huffington Post, International Council of Professors in Educational Leadership, the New Social Worker magazine, and many more. I have also had the honor to interview Chris several times on our Chat and Learn program at Power to Fly. So welcome, Chris. It's good to see you here again. Naya is a transgender and queer experience educator, motivational speaker, and liberator. As a trans woman of color herself, she has cultivated spaces for engaging conversations surrounding the intersectionalities of being Black, a woman, and trans in today's society. To hold space to uncover unconscious cultural assumptions about gender and how they impact the understanding of the trans community is to orchestrate a haven of vulnerability in regards to lived experiences. Welcome, Naya. Thank you for being here today. Now, facilitating this conversation, we have Vera Blossom, who is a writer, editor, and producer. They make work about the complex intersections of race, gender, fashion, beauty, magic, and pop culture. They like to make rich pieces of audio storytelling and collaboration with diverse artists, writers, and storytellers of all kinds. Vera, I'll pass the mic to you all. Thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to listening in.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be talking today about everything that we're going to be talking about. I'm joined by a panel of amazing people, and I think we should just get started. So I think we can start here. There tends to be some confusion over what it means to be non-binary. And I think that's because sex, gender, sexual orientation, these are all things that are really complex, and they all make up our identities. And I think that these aspects of ourselves should not be actually limited by strict definitions, but instead be really broad and informed by lived experiences. With that being said, I'd like to open by asking what it means to each of you to be a woman, what it means to be non-binary, and what it means to be trans. If anyone would like to start, I know it's a big question to start, but it really lays down the foundation for the rest of this conversation.
I can go first, Miley. I'll say what it's like to be a woman and trans, right? Because I can't divorce the two. Um, if I'm being honest, it's being told who and how I should show up, whether it's corporate America or the society. So it's how the world views me and how I have to fall neatly within the binary of how I'm supposed to show up, how I'm supposed to express myself, what I'm supposed to say, how I'm supposed to adapt to what the definition of being a woman is. And as that changes, as you'll hear in the conversation, is that everyone's definition of woman is going to be different. Everybody's definition of trans is going to be different. And then I have to fall neatly in all of those definitions. So to me, what it feels like to be trans and a woman is being free, liberated, and ability to walk truthfully in all authenticity.
I love that. I'll go ahead and go next because on the Brady Bunch of squares, I think I'm next, at least in my view. I love that, what you had to say there, and I'll build upon it from my perspective. As a female who has been in the high tech world for years and years, which has predominantly, I've been doing this for 26 years, has predominantly been male dominated. At least that's been my personal experience across major tech companies. And it's fascinating to me in two key areas. Number one, it almost seems like the people that surround us, and I say us because I think many of us share some of the same thoughts on a day-to-day basis as we go about our day. It feels like there's this need to be defined, and there's a need to fit into someone else's definitions of boxes. And that makes me scratch my head at times because I may be a female executive, but I'm an executive. And at the end of the day, I focus on hitting numbers. I focus on delighting customers. I focus on bringing teams together to do magical things and work together and be powerful. If people feel like they need to box me in a box because it makes sense for them as a female executive, fine, but I'm an executive. That's what I am at the end of the day. I'm proud to be a female executive who has been able to get to where I am today because frankly, it's been hard and it's taken a lot of grit. But it is fascinating to me that there's this need to fit into these boxes that are defined by other people. The second thing that I will say that has been fascinating to me over time is how oftentimes as people who don't fall into the definition of male as an individual in the high-tech world, and I'll speak on behalf of the high-tech world, although I think it does align to other industries as well, there seem to be norms in all industries around work times, around leaves, around life events, those sorts of things. And I'll give you an example. Being a mother of five children, and I had my children very quickly. I had 5 kids in 6 years. I did get a 2-for-1 with twins in there. So 5 kids in 6 years. What was interesting to me was there were these morning meetings that would happen every Monday morning from 7:30 to 8. And no one questioned it. And it was because it was predominantly people who all had the same lifestyle. They had a stay-at-home partner who was able to take children to school. And I was the stay-at-home partner I was the partner who didn't happen to be stay-at-home, but I was the person who was taking the children to school. And so in talking to other people in my position in the workplace, it really became evident that there are norms that have been established over the years, and maybe they don't make sense anymore. Maybe that was something that was established a long, long time ago. And what I have opened up with my team to talk about is what are the norms that make sense today? How can people feel supported in the workplace today so that we are helping today's workforce flourish? Because at the end of the day, I had things to say on those 7:30 to 8 a.m. Monday morning meetings. And it felt really hard for me, and I didn't feel included when I wasn't at my screen on video with my piece of paper in front of me where I could be as productive as my peers. So those are a couple of examples that I would throw out there that I think we just have to think better about. We have to do better, both on the side of the people that are creating the rules and then people like us who actually can change what the world looks like moving forward. Those are my thoughts.
I'll jump in next. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. I would say that for me, being a woman is intricately tied to being my Blackness. And, just as Naili was sharing that she can't separate the two, same with me. Like I can't separate my Blackness from my womanhood. And the thing about, being a woman is, again, being told how you're meant to show up or what that means. Now, for me, my womanhood has always been very much tied to my fertility, but that's for me. I don't use that. That's Tara's womanhood, not the definition of anyone else's womanhood, right? And my wife is on a journey, currently non-binary, but even that term, she is like, I don't know if that's the right term. And I say to her, you don't have to pick any term. You don't have to pick anything. You're you. You realize some person at some point in our history decided that people that have these organs we're going to call them man. This was not something that came with our, innate human knowledge. This is something that was created. And I remember some time ago, a friend of my sister's came to visit. We were in Jamaica at the time, and she's non-binary. We were having a conversation. This was several years ago, almost a decade. And at that point, she shared, that she doesn't believe in gender. It should just be dismissed. We should just get rid of gender. And I remember at that time not understanding what she meant by that. But as time has gone on and I've matured and, been exposed to more, I've realized that is absolutely true. To your point, Vera, the confusion between gender, sex, and sexuality is, I think, a large part of why people are clinging so hard to the concept of gender. Gender is a given, it's a societal construct. It is not innate to who we are as human beings. The only thing we all are for sure are human beings. And that's it. Everything from that point forward has been constructed by a society that at some point, came together and created a set of norms and values and mores and definitions that have just been maintained throughout generations. There's no reason why that cannot shift. There's no reason why we cannot change that social contract and create a new one. And so to answer your question, I've shared what it means for me to be a woman, and that I believe that is a very separate definition for each and every other woman in the world. And my concept of non-binary really is, my wife, the closest person to me. And even in that space, I feel like many, and I can't speak for anyone, but I know for her, even saying non-binary is only because she feels she has to pick one. But I really think that the people that tend to draw to that term are really people that just don't, they don't want to pick anything else and just feel like they have to. And that, I think, is, I think those people represent, an evolution in humanity, where there's another level where there is no box. We completely flow from one end of the spectrum to another at any given moment, at any given time. And I think that really helps us experience the full spectrum of our humanness. And I encourage often people who show up or maybe biologically female, identify as a woman, and to really consider leaning into what does masculinity feel for you, because whether it's 2% of you or 30% of you, there is an entire spectrum within all of us. And And I think, so to conclude, I would say that I think we should move in the direction of releasing these definitions and forming a new social contract.
I'll go next since we opened the topic of non-binary. Well, I identify as non-binary, and you know what we've been talking about when it comes to gender is sovereignty. Really, it's being able to be the one who identify and tell people who we should be and how we should show up in the world. So allowing that sovereignty to be centered in the person who's actually identifying it and being able to be okay with that, right? It's like releasing ourselves from that domination or having power over concepts, terms, language, behavior, and actions, and really just giving power to people who and how do they want to identify, period. My non-binary experience, I would consider it as my personal liberation, that to be able to also embrace those parts of me that do not belong, to be okay to be other, like other in that spectrum and the systems within language and terms and construct that have been created without me in mind anyway. That's for me is what it means to be non-binary. It's my spiritual freedom. It's being able to connect to the essence of who I am as a human being, like what Miss or Tara said. And I have the full power to say who I get to be and who I want to be. And standing in that power and just showing up fully as I am, authentically and fully, without the limitations that the world has given us. Because really, really, you know, this is what we've been trying to aim for. It's to have power over us, not over people, not over systems, not over countries. It's to feel that worth, and to feel that worth starts with really fully embracing all of it.
I guess that brings it to me then. I tend to be in spaces educating others on sort of how we treat groups of people who might not have heard before. So I kind of look at this sort of from the, we've been talking from the out and have had it from side. Sort of the answer is, it doesn't matter, you'll never know unless you talk to you. For each person here, the information and the definitions are different. So I look at it just the way the plan is. You're not expected to know before you meet the person if they haven't already told you. And if you listen to you and you just call them by or introduce them by or use what they tell you, that happens all the time. We know that someone might be named Elizabeth, who might go by or B or Beth or E, or maybe by their middle name or by their last name. We find out they introduce themselves and we hear the name they use, and then all we have to do is use the name here. So for the people who are tuning in, who are trying to figure out, with everybody here having different definitions, how to know someone or how to call someone, you ask them. Same as with names, same as names. For what you do. And even if you met them 5 or 10 years ago and they told you one thing, and then go by the thing they just told you most recently, because people's names change, people's identities change, the same way that somebody's job title might change. The same way that if you met me a year ago, I was not a doctor. Sorts of things happen. And so rather than ever being fearful of these topics and conversations, following their lead sets you up to be successful every time, because people are happy to clue you in if you ask them with respect, will the information.
Thank you, Chris. I think that you also might have an iffy internet connection, and I think we got the gist, but some of it was lost. So I'm sorry. But that brings us to our next question, I think, which is about helping, I think, for colleagues of people who bring a diversity of gender expression to the workplace. How can they best understand or bring an understanding to our colleagues, such as us who are non-binary or who are women, who are trans? I think so far we've learned that you can't really know someone until you meet them, right? And that this diversity of gender expression is fully informed by our really rich lives and like how we live outside of work. And the first step, I think, to understanding someone is to listening to their introduction, and then you know what name to call them. But do you have any advice for those people who are working with gender diverse people and how they can best bring understanding to the workplace? I think of your anecdote, Jen, of how these meetings were normalized and they didn't make sense for your lifestyle. And I think it goes beyond just being like, I don't understand non-binary people, to how can an understanding of different gender expressions and gender identities actually help make a workplace become more collaborative and safe and healthy?
Were you about to, I don't want to interrupt you. Were you about to talk?
No, you can go, because I could jump all over this one.
I know, me too. And so I have to sometimes hold back my enthusiasm, but I'll be short and sweet and then I'll pass it on over. But there's two things, again, that come to mind. Again, I guess today is the magic of two. So one, I would say, I do think we owe it as human beings to the people that surround us to talk about what we need. And in the past, we've been shy. And we expect people to just get it, just understand it. But they don't necessarily do that. So I think we have to talk about the things that are important. And the other thing I think we have to do just as a group of human beings is to make sure that we associate inclusion with business performance at the end of the day. Because I always think about it like this. If I had a choice, if we were on Survivor Island and we had one more year in order to drive amazing business results, and whatever we did this year needed to be our best year ever, needed to be our personal records, I would be looking for the people that had grit, the people that had new ways of thinking about things that were different than me, than different than the next person, different to the person over here, different geographic views on things as well, because I've always run global sales organizations. And I think that's what drives magical results, connecting it back to business performance at the end of the day. Too often, we look at people on a piece of paper with a resume, and unfortunately, we have a name attached. And I think oftentimes there are associations that people make with a name, or perhaps where they went to school, or the companies they've worked for, the geographies that they've lived in. And there's this pedigree that people have in their minds, fortunately or unfortunately, that they've kind of decided this person and what box they fit into, similar to what I said before. So I think if we do those two things, number one, if we talk more about what we need, because it's time to do that. It's 2022. Let's talk about what we need. But then at the same time, connect it all back to business performance, because at the end of the day, I will die on this hill and say that the best performing businesses have the magic of thought from every single human being that can come to the table with those ideas that help delight customers at the end of the day, period. And so that is what I think about this topic. But I'm going to pass it over to you, because I know you had something to say that was probably even better than this.
Stop. But I will add to that. And I want to flatten it, because if we can understand this in the workplace, we can understand this in the world, right? Because transphobia exists everywhere, right? It's not just a microcosm at work in corporate America, but it's also my day-to-day. I mean, this is how it impacts me every day. Everything is gendered. Positions are gendered. Positions of power, it's gendered. Dress code is gendered. Thoughts are gendered, ideas are gendered, everything is gendered. If we can understand the concept that, hey, we are conditioned in a society where we gender everything, we gender color, we gender how we show up, we gender expression, we gender everything, we gender success, we gender how much money a person should make, men should make this, women should do this, we gender everything. So if we understand the concept of how society tells us that everything should be gendered, we can unlock the idea of how we should engage people, because we already just named that we have assumptions on a person's name. We have assumptions on how a person shows up. We have assumptions even if a person tells us that our pronouns are her. We already assume that they're binary. That's not true. We don't know. Even if I profess all of these things to a person, you still don't know. So to answer another question that's in the chat, how do you approach this in a workplace with grace and professionalism? Create a safe space to do so. And by doing that, I'm saying, I understand, because we have conversations often, I understand that everything is gender. I understand that we cannot make these assumptions because I don't know if a person is cis. I don't know if a person is trans. I don't know if what a person's pronouns until I engage with them and have conversations in a safe way. How do you do that safely, professionally, with grace is how I'm showing up even in my language. I don't use terms female. I'll say assigned male at birth. I'll say assigned female at birth, or I don't do gendered language. Hey guys, hey ladies, hey gentlemen. I don't, if things are said incorrectly, I won't hold back from correcting it. Well, that's a man's job. I will correct that. So people that are sitting around me, right, that because I can't assume who's cis, who's trans, will see that, hey, Niley gets it. Niley understands, Niley is creating a safe space. So more of these conversations where, hey, I'm holding accountability. I'm having course corrections. I'm having conversations where I'm making people aware that everything is gendered. We are making assumptions on, I'm sorry, my light keeps going off. Everyone makes assumptions on people's who they are. I can tell you that I'm trans and my pronouns are she and her. That still tells you nothing about me. That tells you nothing about how I show up. That tells you nothing about my genitalia. That tells you nothing. And the only way that we can have conversations if we start listening more and asking more questions once safety is established. I'll end there.
And that's it for that question. I'm kidding. That was really on point. Niley just stated so eloquently, fully, richly, and deeply. It's creating the safe space for us to even show up as that, and beyond the category too. Because when we allow ourselves to be fully free, we tap into our maximum potential. That's just how our brain works. When there are no barriers in our brains that's stopping it or that's stunting it, or even triggering our amygdala that just go towards fear in survival mode all at the same time, right? We wouldn't have to actually question people's performance and see their potential in the workplace, because we're not only supporting them or allowing the prefrontal cortex that supports the dopamine, like all that, to move beyond survival. And beyond the survival instincts of our brain is our talent, our gifts, our skills that we can basically use in our performance at work. And what we must do is not be the reason why that's triggered in the environment that we occupy with people that are of diverse demographics and background.
I guess I'll tie it in with the other question that popped up in the chat, Vera, if you don't mind, because I think they're very much related. An equitable workplace is, addressing gender. Honestly, I really, yesterday was International Women's Day, and that was a great opportunity to really investigate and interrogate what that means for employees when you are creating, my background is marketing. So when you're creating the campaign around International Women's Day. What does that look like? How are you being inclusive of all women? And I think in those ways, it's creating a system of interrogation, creating a system of self-checks, creating, a rubric that people have to go through in order to, ensure that their bias is not leading their decision-making. And that piece, and be accountable for that. I think the other piece too is letting things go by, people in power letting, someone slip and say something that is inappropriate and they don't correct them. I think an indicator of a workplace that supports gender diversity and diversity overall is at that accountability. That person's going to get checked, right? That there's going to be a conversation around, what is permissible in that space and what is not welcome in that space. And I think, regardless of whether someone is or isn't, and whether someone understands or not, whether they get it or not, it's not for them necessarily to get or understand who someone else is. It really is for them to create a safe space because they recognize each person, each human in that organization is worth creating safe spaces for, and identifying those needs and meeting them without othering them, which is the other, balance that has to be created.
And Vera, I think that goes to what Jen said earlier about it's time to change, right? It's time to redefine, because like even yesterday, and I'm glad you brought that up, Tara, with International Women's Day, that wasn't inclusive to non-binary folk. So on all of my social media platforms, I put International Non-Men's Day. That's inclusive to people what about the ones that don't identify as women? So even still that we're moving so much forward in language and how we're redefining gender, we're redefining femininity and masculinity, we're redefining and teaching how everything is on a spectrum, everything. And that cis heteronormativity is not the default. It should not be the default. And so as we're redefining these things, woman and how we define it, and is that still inclusive? How are we looking at terms like that when we're honoring people that also do not identify as women? So on my social media, it was International Non-Men's Day. So again, tying back to how do we do that at work, I'm creating that safe space because again, I'm not trying to out a person. I am not trying to tell a person to be visible. I'm not forcing a person to be out. I am creating the space so a person knows that they can be comfortable being visible, being out around me.
Thank you for that. And it seems like we might have lost Chris. Hopefully she can come back. She seems like she wrote the book on practical resources for LGBT plus people. So, it would be great to have her back. But so talking about grace in terms of, what was the question that in particular? It was, how do you address gender identity in the workplace with grace and professionalism? I think that we're talking a lot about change. I'm sorry, there's of course a leaf blower outside right now. How can we go about changing a lot of these antiquated gender roles that we've inscribed into the workplace? What are some things that, like colloquial terms, dress codes that exclude non-binary people, that are misogynist, that can be changed in terms of structure, in terms of onboarding? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I have a thought on this. I tend to look inward at what I personally can do, and I try to focus on me first, the change I can make first that would be positive. In addition to what I mentioned before, which is talking about what I need, a personal experience I remember, gosh, it's 20 years ago now, was I was surrounded by men in meetings. And so I would typically I started looking like an FBI agent. I mean, I was wearing my black and gray suits with the white shirt or the light blue shirt because I wanted to really blend in. And it took me a while to find my own footing and say, well, wait a minute, the goal here isn't for me to blend in with my environment. I am standing on my own as an executive, and I will personally manage the way that I carry myself in meetings, the way that I dress. And so all of a sudden I started wearing color, and it really just surprised everyone. But at the end of the day, nothing bad happened, right? I can wear color in the office, and it's, I know this was 20 years ago, and of course the analogy is probably a little bit different now, but my point is still the same. And that's that I do think we have to look to ourselves to empower ourselves to feel comfortable asking for what we need and showing up the way that we want to show up. I really do, because sometimes those boundaries could be in our head a bit too. Nothing bad happened when I walked into those meetings and sat at the table, as opposed to sitting towards the back of the room, sat at the table and wore all pink. Nothing bad happened. I remember walking into a meeting a couple of years ago, and it was going to be all men. And in that room, those men decided to dress similarly, and they all happened to be wearing the same monochromatic colors. That was kind of the way the office dressed at the time, with the white or the blue shirts. And I remember wearing hot pink from head to toe with white boots. And I was just fine. I survived the meeting. It ended up being okay at the end of the day. And I remember telling my girlfriends about this later and thinking to myself, maybe that was a little bit of me trying to blend in with what I was perceiving would have me do well in that meeting. But at the same time, the value that I would bring in that room, the brain power that I was bringing into the room, it didn't matter what I wore. And so I need to make sure that I get out of my own head sometimes too. And so that's something that I will share that was just a vulnerability of mine that I had to go through some discovery on.
That really reminds me of actually Christine's bit about being in survival mode, and how perhaps that the urge to blend in was more of a survival tactic, because we know that it's not based on nothing, that dressing more quote unquote femininely or differently, especially in the past, but even these days, could lead to something bad could happen. And so I ask, how can we create spaces that empower people to bring their full selves? Because I think there's obviously it takes a little bit of nerve to just be full yourself in the workplace, and that can be scary. And so how can we create an environment that is assuring that nothing bad will happen to you for being yourself in this workplace?
I think the first part is having a policy and procedure. What is your handbook? What is your guide around trans and non-binary people? If you don't have one, you need to adopt one. Schools are already doing it. What does the dress code look like? The dress code, if you look at a school's, how they identify with dress code, it's on a cartoon stick figure, and it says no straps, no this, and the person isn't gendered at all. The policy of what violations on harassment around trans and non-binary people, it is clear, because a lot of times people don't touch this conversation because it's taboo. Creating that first, so you have the groundwork of what it looks like, what are the consequences, what is the policy around trans non-binary people, because again, I shouldn't have to tell you that I'm trans for you to know that there needs to be some type of protection and safety around me. I don't want to tell you, because I know that becomes my identity when I'm at work. So first, creating the policy and procedure. Then second, how are we having these conversations around it? And me, again, how am I showing up at work? Jen just described that, again, color is gendered. The guys are wearing white and blue. She wanted to wear hot pink. Input gender. So I think that even in that moment of empowering femininity is saying, hey, I deserve to be sitting here, and hey, my ideas are great. And they're most times, if I'm being honest, the best ones. So if we understand that, hey, we are so conditioned to gendering everything, and that we live in such a patriarchal society that, again, masculinity takes the precedence, and that we don't hold any space for anything else. Everything else that falls under, whether it's trans, whether it's non-binary, whether it's femininity, all of these things fall under that. So if we can still show up as ourselves, once we have a policy in place, it'll empower people such as myself, such as you all, to come in and say, hey, I deserve to sit at this table and you will hear me. That will encourage me to bring my entire self to work. Lastly, employee resource groups. They're so important. You can have employee resource groups for queer and trans people to say that there's something that exists, that we support queer and trans people at the workplace. We do these organizations within the workplace, so there's some type of solace where people of like minds can have a conversation. I think all three of those things working in tandem will allow a person to feel as though they can bring their entire selves to work.
Yes, those policies are so very, very important. And I also wanted to piggyback on the clothing, the gender expression, or how we express ourselves through clothing. Really allow people to have the freedom to express themselves and represent themselves in the workplace. There could be a list of stuff that are not allowed, right? It's like the spaghetti straps, the really high crop top ones, jeans. I've been hearing about these jeans, ripped jeans. And it's also for women and men. It's like, so create a list that are no-nos for every gender. And however that represents, or however people take on that and interpret that and present that with who they are in the workplace, should have the welcome as it is. It's like, why do we even care? It's like, we're not Gucci. We're not, we're not even fashion experts, and even fashion experts need to also be decolonized in a lot of ways. Anyway, we don't have to be that person that police people and how they present themselves. And I also want to add the colloquial terms. I'm an immigrant. I didn't grow up here. Colloquial terms as a whole for me is just exclusive for Western folks, or people who are born and raised in the US or in a specific region or a specific country. That in itself is just exclusive. Like in meetings, people would throw in a phrase or that should make people laugh, and I'm just out there sitting and not saying anything because I didn't get what they meant. Like those phrases and idioms, is like, oh, I should laugh. But already I felt in that moment, it's like, I'm not part of this conversation. I don't feel like I belong here, So colloquial terms as a whole, I think, is very exclusive and it focuses on just people who are familiar or of native to the words, the language, and also the culture. But given that our workplace and workspace is multicultural now and globalized all at the same time, I think thinking, again, higher thinking or elevated thinking or outside of that box should allow for alternatives. The alternative is just to say what you mean. That's it. Just say what you mean and not code it in ways that are, again, centered and focused in different demographics or geography.
Thank you. Yeah, as always, inclusion is complex, it's intersectional, and you have to communicate. Okay, I would like to move to a few questions from the audience that I think are really juicy, and I think some of these correlate. So someone asks, please talk about how to manage gender transition in the workplace. I assume when you hire someone and their name is one way, their gender is one way, and then while they're working for you, they transition to a different name and pronouns and gender. And I think this also kind of dovetails into, Lisa asks, how important is understanding the anatomical makeup of participants to creating an inclusive environment? It seems invasive, yet necessary. restrooms, giveaways, activities, anticipation of medical and personal concerns, etc. So I feel like these are kind of correlated gender questions. So if anyone has any thoughts on these.
I can go really quickly because I actually transitioned at work before. Horrible experience, which is why I'm doing this work. I think it's really important to have a policy in place. Start and there. I was mishandled a multitude of times where I became, oh, there's Niley, there's the trans person that we talked about. So everyone also knew about my transness, and it was the most vulnerable place because it was also new for me. I did my social transition at work. How to manage that is, again, still understanding that it is something extremely invasive and it requires vulnerability and delicacy. It is very personal and sacred to me. So I am trusting human resources to treat this as fair and as important and serious as it is to me, as it is to them. And to answer the question about anatomy, I don't think it's important at all. You don't need to know my genitalia. You don't need to know my chromosomes. You don't need to know what surgery I'm doing. You don't need to know any of these things. You just need to know where I am and how you can support me. I will tell you. What I need from you is this. What I need from you is that. When it comes to restrooms, again, we can't make these assumptions, so let's make everything gender neutral. We get so bogged down to genitalia and anatomy that we confuse ourselves. None of us are bioessentialists. None of us study biology. I don't care your chromosomes to know that your name is Christine and your pronouns are she, her, they. I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that you need to go which restroom you'll feel the most comfortable in. I don't need to know what is between your legs. I don't need to know how you show up, how you express. I don't need to know any of those things. And I think people get so bogged down to genitalia because we're taught sex equals genitals, and it's not, because we know how we show up that sometimes they don't match with how we've been taught. So again, policy, procedure, that is important. If you don't have a policy that is inclusive to trans and non-binary people, create one, because there are people that are wanting to transition and are holding their breath at work and cannot express themselves and not even able to present at full capacity, because when a person transitions and are able to bring their whole self to work, they're presenting themselves at the most 100% of their ability. So them not being able to do that, you're not even getting the full person that you hired. So policy and procedure and less on anatomy and genitalia and more on what is more inclusive to everybody, because you don't need to know those things.
And again, if any one of us in the workplace is going on a surgery or medical procedure, no one needs to disclose that at work at all. So I don't think this needs to even be a conversation at the slightest. Please allow yourself to not give a shit. Be okay with not knowing, right? Again, it's like, what are you even, if you are not gonna be there to provide any contribution to this transition, please just allow space for people who could and who can. One very important thing around this is to make sure to differ, aside, of course, on top, policies, procedures definitely need to be safe and inclusive. Secondly, defer to the person who's transitioning. You don't get to have a say on how this works, but only them who's going to be experiencing this journey. First of all, how do we publicize the new name, right? After publicizing the new name, what is the naming? Like concepts and terms and all these things. How do you even make sure that that's like the name that is being used across the board, right? There's that. There's like the pronouns, the bathrooms in itself. Let's just again put the definition around bathrooms. It's really to attend to our private needs, period. But attend to your private needs. Don't need judgment, honestly, because it's private. remove your judgment around the private needs, because that's all the purpose of what a restroom is. If the stalls need to be longer, and make sure it's like from floor to ceiling, whatever that looks like, but the safety in it is the non-judgment, the feeling that I can actually really attend to my private needs without thinking about any of y'all's thoughts or inner conversations around this. I think another very important is also the benefits or the days off. For the folks that are transitioning, there is like an emotional and physical barriers for them to be in this space. So we need to create that to allow that for that full support. That's also very important. And yeah, just there are days when it's hard to actually speak up. I would love for people to just be an advocate when it's hard for folks who are transitioning. And you really do the work within yourself to release these feeling or this desire to dominate or to have power over these processes and procedures. Like, I love people who have power to do so on their own terms.
Yeah, I really feel like, especially for managers, executives, and leaders, it's like to bring no judgment to the table and creating an environment of safety by actually protecting and advocating for these people of all genders when it feels like they're being excluded or harassed in some way. So yes. So I think I would like to ask, how can companies support the visibility and career development, especially of their female, trans, and non-binary employees, without tokenizing them? And I think I would like to throw this to either Tara or Jen, because I feel like it's been a minute since we've heard from either of you.
Tara, do you want to go first?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So here's what I would say. I think that every human who's in the career world needs to have a plan to self-advocate, period. All people need to make sure that they have their plan to self-advocate, because I think that too many careers these days are a bit presumptuous around a linear progression. And it's not always like that. Some people desire to be in the same role for a long, long time, but they want to be appreciated and they want to have advancement within that specific position within their company that they're currently at. Many people also want to step to the side and gain experiences in parallel that perhaps complement the role that they currently have. And then some people have said, hey, I'd like to climb up a ladder, and here's what my ladder looks like, and it's different than your ladder, and it's different than their ladder. So I think every person has to create their ladder and then be a self-advocate and set up a call and say, I want to talk to you about what's important to me, and I'd like to talk to you about how you can support me. And the reason it's so important to do right now, and the reason everyone here, to go back to the theme of this talk today, the power to fly, the reason right now you have the power to fly is because it is a talent market right now. You have the opportunity to pick up your toys and go to a different employer if you don't feel like you have the ability to flourish where you are today. And I will tell you, I make sure in my organization, people can flourish. And it's because we care about all minds coming to the table to progress customer delight. At the end of the day, that is what we care about. We want our customers to be successful. All minds will be included, period. So in order for people on my team personally to advance their career, if they came to me or they came to one of my leaders to say, I'd really like your support. I have some ideas. I want your brain power on this too. How can you support me within your own network for either what I want to do in this company or also in the industry? I make those connections every single day. And I'm a big promoter, I would say, of supporting the people that do that. So that's part one. Part two, though, is there's a lot of people who have the desire to do more, and they just don't have the confidence right now to ask for help. And those are the people that I am constantly looking for in my organization. So, and I look for them inside of my company, but I also look for them outside of the company. People I meet in events like this, or people that I meet in the community while I'm just interacting. I think that People will do more if they realize they're capable of more. And sometimes it takes somebody like us on this panel to say, hey, you're capable of more. And the time is now. And you should go do it. And you should stretch and you should try it. And I will be there if you fall. You have the power to fly. I mean, to go back to why I was so intrigued in being a part of this panel, I do believe that people have the power to fly. So I think it's a combination of those two things: asking, laying out what you think you want to do, and then asking for the support to do it. And by golly, if you're not getting it where you are today, then go find a place where you can, because this is a talent market. And it is ripe right now for you to have the choice to be where you want to be, to flourish. You deserve to flourish. There you go.
Perhaps I should have gone first. I think Jen really spoke to the promoting side of really kind of being proactive as employees and being proactive as leaders in the workplace. I think also there is that piece of, I believe the question was particularly around supporting professional development of women, non-binary, and trans employees. And I think part of it too is recognizing that there are barriers. It's one thing to, be their hype person, but beyond that, how can you help to make that path easier? How can you help to break down some of those barriers? And I think that piece is where those who, vis-a-vis the particular employee or group of employees hold the power can really step in and make the path. Because, for many of us, we're self-motivated, we're go-getters, and some of it really is, those glass ceilings. And having someone in power just bulldoze through it is all we really need. We don't necessarily need, we have the hype man somewhere else, right? So it really is about how can they start to break down the walls, break down the barriers within their control as people who have more social capital, just by nature of how we are. How the contract we all signed, to really not be afraid to break those barriers down and to have those tough conversations as well with those who may be in the way of progress. There's a comedian that always she kind of speaks to that, whether or not someone is in the way of progress, or they're not allowing people to progress. And I think that is really important, is how, especially as a leader, how am I helping someone progress? Either by being that fuel, or if they already have that fuel, by making sure that there are as minimal obstacles in the way as is within my control. And that is the piece that I feel sometimes gets missed, because it's more about I'm helping them, I'm being, really caring about my diverse staff, versus how are you, and to Niley's point, changing policies and procedures. How are you, for example, if someone has to be in a position for 5 years before they can move on to the next one, revisit that. Everyone is different. Maybe you're having people prove things, or you're noticing some employees have to prove themselves a little more than others. Create a policy and create a system of enforcement to ensure that people are being treated fairly and given the opportunity to progress without those barriers. And I really think it's that bravery piece and taking that initiative and having courage to have those tough conversations.
I think it's also important. I am tokenized a lot. I am a Black trans woman from the South. That's 4 different minorities, if you want to count cultural and geographical oppression, but that's neither here nor there. I think what will allow a person to want to enter in that space is if it's welcoming, inviting, and authentic. If I can tell that a company or organization is really invested in doing the work, and I know that it's awkward, I know that there's going to be some missteps, I know that there's going to be a disconnect, there will be lots of resistance, I'm aware of that. But if I can feel that it's genuine and authentic and it's welcome and inviting, I don't mind being the token trans woman for this conversation. Because what is going to happen when I'm in that space, I'm going to wake it up. I'm going to say, hey, let's not do this. We should not be doing that. And we can say this across the board. Anytime we're in a space where we are the minority, whether we are the minority as women, we are the minority as trans, non-binary, we are the cultural, whatever, when we're allowed in a space, there is some type of potential that we can be tokenized. Oh, let's hear from Christine. She's an immigrant. Okay, but what is Christine going to do in that space? And does Christine feel as though it's authentic? Is it genuine? Because what if Christine doesn't want to do anything? I just want to show up and exist. But if I am actually engaged in, okay, I really want to make this an open space and safe space for other people that don't and that do not want to come out, that do not want to be visible, that they actually just want to come up and do their job and go home, I'm going to make sure that we're doing this work as the token. So I think it'll, because I can hear both ends of this. Hey, we need people to speak, but no one wants to speak. Hey, because it's not safe. So who's going to do it? You have a person that's going to do it. Are you being genuine and authentic with doing so? So if you can come into a conversation where people are welcoming, plus in addition to all the things that we named, removing the assumptions, creating the safe space, having a policy and procedure, understanding pronouns that are just not because a person says they, them, that non-binary is also political. That is not just, hey, I don't want to be called she, her. It's also, I don't conform to the definitions of what a man or what a woman is. Understanding all of those things and then being genuine with what you want to use me for, right? Because if it is just, I really want to learn this, I really want to get it, I'm going to take from you as the minority or the less marginalized, I have to be mindful of how I'm relaying that information and if it's genuine and it's true to me and you can hear that it's coming from an authentic, ethical place.
I will just throw in real quick, I promise. 3 things: pay them, sponsor them, and I'll give them the sovereignty to run any project and independence on anything that they want to do that would really support their career development and potential, and also support the bottom line of the company as a whole. Okay? That's the 3 things.
Thank you everyone for being here. I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours. Obviously, we're like right up on this time limit. So I want to thank everyone for watching and for being on this panel with me. And I'm going to hand the mic back to Mariella.
Woo, y'all, I got my hand on my heart because it's about to pop out of my chest. I'm serious. So necessary. Thank you so much, each and every one of you, for being here today. I just want to show up and exist. That is like my biggest takeaway from this full hour. And I wish we had more time because you all are special, each and every one of you. We are all special. And I just want to say thank you to every single person on this panel. We hear you, we see you, we appreciate the work that you do. Such an important dialogue happening today. I feel like I'm about to take us to church a little bit. So thank you for showing us how to have authentic dialogue and for encouraging us to be better. And thank you, Power to Fly, for having this space for us to talk this candidly. And I just want to take a moment of silence just to reflect and reconnect with the beauty and the power within each of us.